I never imagined my wedding day would be marked by anything other than joy and celebration. Yet there I was, glaring across the room at my husband's ex-girlfriend, Amanda, who had been invited to the ceremony by none other than my soon-to-be mother-in-law, Janet. The smug, triumphant look on Amanda's face only heightened my mortification. I was utterly unprepared for this bizarre twist in what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. The weeks leading up to the wedding had been filled with the usual preparations, choosing centerpieces, coordinating colors, and sampling decadent cakes. Nowhere in all that planning had I anticipated the moment I'd see Amanda, escorted into the church by Janet as if she belonged there. Her presence felt like a cruel joke. This was the woman who had shattered Eric's heart years ago. Her infidelity so blatant it had left him questioning his worth. He had spoken of her during the early days of our relationship, describing her as charming and vibrant, the kind of woman who could light up a room, until her lies and betrayal extinguished that light for him. While Eric had moved on, Janet clearly had not. Her decision to invite Amanda felt like a deliberate insult, a silent declaration that she doubted my worth as a wife. Janet had always been vocal about her opinions, offering unsolicited advice on everything from how I should dress to how I should manage a household. Yet this, bringing Amanda to my wedding, was a step too far. Janet even had the audacity to insist that Amanda could teach me how to be a better wife. I stood in my lace gown, clutching my bouquet with trembling hands, struggling to keep my composure. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I tried to make sense of the chaos. My sister Tessa, fuming with indignation, whisked me into the bridal suite, demanding answers. My best friend Jill stood by, ready to throw Amanda out herself. I was torn between letting them intervene and confronting the situation on my own. After all, this day was supposed to be about love, not a battleground for Janet's misguided attempts at control. Eric soon appeared, his face pale and his expression strained. "I'll take care of this," he promised, his voice trembling with anger. He left to confront Janet, leaving me to wrestle with a whirlwind of emotions. I reminded myself why we were here, to celebrate our love and commitment. Still, as I walked down the aisle to the soft strains of the organ, Amanda's conspicuous presence in the third row was impossible to ignore. Her expression, a mixture of longing and triumph, clashed with Janet's watchful glances, as if she were gauging whether I'd learned some unspoken lesson. Yet Eric's calm, reassuring gaze grounded me. As we exchanged our vows, the world fell away, leaving only us. In that moment nothing else mattered. We sealed our promises with a kiss, the applause of our guests offering a fragile shield against the storm brewing in the background. The reception, however, was another minefield. Guests whispered about Amanda's audacity, while others remained blissfully unaware of the drama. My mother, who had never been fond of Janet's overbearing ways, sent me sympathetic glances. Meanwhile, Amanda and Janet huddled together, whispering and casting furtive glances in my direction. It was maddening, but I refused to let them ruin the day. Then came the final straw. Janet cornered me by the buffet, chastising me for not fixing Eric's plate. "Amanda always took such good care of him," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. My cheeks flared, but I held my tongue, unwilling to create a scene. Later, when I told Eric what had happened, a fierce protectiveness ignited in his eyes. "Enough," he muttered before marching off to confront Janet. From a distance, I overheard their heated exchange. Eric made it clear that her interference was unwelcome, that our marriage was ours to navigate, and that if she couldn't respect me, she would jeopardize her relationship with him. Janet looked stunned, unable to comprehend why her actions had caused so much turmoil. Amanda, ever the opportunist, placed a hand on Janet's shoulder, a silent attempt to soothe her. Watching them, I felt a surge of cold fury mixed with pity. Janet, trapped in outdated notions of marriage, couldn't see the damage she was causing. In the months that followed, Eric and I focused on building our life together, ignoring Janet's unsolicited advice. Our marriage thrived despite her interference, a testament to the strength of our partnership. Amanda's smug presence at the wedding became a strange anecdote, a reminder of how much we had overcome. Then everything changed. One evening as I folded laundry, Janet called, her voice choked with tears. Leonard, her husband of 30 years, had moved out and was talking about divorce. When she arrived at our home, she looked smaller, her usual air of authority replaced with vulnerability. Between sobs, she confessed that Leonard felt stifled, accusing her of being controlling and overbearing. He had grown tired of her constant nagging and left, claiming he needed freedom. As she begged me to help save her marriage, I was struck by the irony. This was the woman who had tried to undermine mine, yet here she was, seeking my support. Despite everything, I couldn't ignore her pain. Compassion won out, and I listened as she poured out her heart. In that moment, I saw not an adversary but a woman grappling with loss, her own illusions of control shattered. Though I didn't have the answers she sought, I offered her my sympathy, knowing firsthand how much strength it took to rebuild trust and respect in a relationship. It was a bittersweet reminder that love, in all its forms, requires patience, humility, and the courage to grow. I hesitated, unsure whether I should involve myself in the tangled threads of their marital strife. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. The very woman who had sought to undermine my marriage was now seeking my guidance to save her own. Yet, a memory of my father's departure years ago nudged me toward empathy. Sometimes people need an outsider to mediate, even when the task feels daunting. That evening I shared Janet's request with Eric. He was conflicted. He loved both his parents deeply, and the thought of their marriage unraveling after 3 decades unsettled him. At the same time, he couldn't forget how Janet's overbearing tendencies had impacted his own childhood. From dictating his hobbies to micromanaging his friendships, she had always been difficult to please. The possibility that Leonard had endured the same patterns for years made Eric uneasy. Ultimately, his commitment to family pushed him to encourage me to at least listen to his father's perspective. I arranged to meet Leonard at a small cafe downtown, a neutral space where neither of us would feel cornered. I arrived early, nursing a latte while anxiety knotted my stomach. When Leonard walked in, he looked weary. His shoulders slumped, his face drawn, as though sleep had eluded him for weeks. He offered a faint smile, took a seat across from me, and thanked me for agreeing to meet. Then, in a voice heavy with sorrow, he began to unburden himself. He described the loneliness that had crept into his marriage over the years. Despite sharing a home, he and Janet had grown distant, their conversations reduced to instructions or criticisms. Genuine dialogue had all but vanished. Whenever he tried to voice his frustration, Janet dismissed him, waving away his feelings as if they didn't matter. Over time, her controlling behavior chipped away at his sense of self. Silence became his shield, but even that had limits. Finally, he'd reached a breaking point. Listening to him, I struggled to reconcile this quiet, kind man with the image of the seemingly perfect marriage Janet had always projected. Leonard admitted that he wasn't blameless. His tendency to avoid confrontation had allowed these patterns to persist. But now he felt it was too late to salvage what was left. He had already moved into a small apartment, begun therapy on his own, and was considering divorce. His words carried a quiet finality that left me uncertain whether reconciliation was even possible. Gently, I asked if there was any scenario in which he might give Janet another chance, provided she acknowledged her behavior and committed to real change. Leonard paused, staring into his coffee as if searching for an answer in its depths. "I don't know," he said at last. "I still love her, but I can't go back to the way things were. I won't survive it." Later that evening, I relayed Leonard's perspective to Janet. She sat at my kitchen table, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her teacup. I didn't sugarcoat anything, explaining that Leonard felt suffocated and unheard in their marriage. Her reaction was a mixture of surprise and indignation, as if the very idea that she had been overbearing was unthinkable. She insisted she had done everything for him: cooking, cleaning, managing bills, duties she considered the hallmarks of a good wife. Her words mirrored the same outdated ideals she had tried to impose on me, even going so far as to bring Amanda to my wedding as an example of how to be a proper spouse. Struck by the irony, I reminded her of how humiliating that experience had been for me. For a moment, Janet looked genuinely ashamed, then fell into a weary silence. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Did he say if he still loves me?" she asked, tears glistening in her eyes. I told her that he did, but that he felt trapped in old patterns and doubted whether they could truly change. Janet buried her face in her hands and wept. In that moment, my frustration toward her softened. I realized how deeply ingrained her beliefs were, likely passed down through generations. She truly thought she was fulfilling her role as a wife, never understanding that her approach had been stifling. Determined to see if healing was possible, I suggested professional counseling. Janet recoiled at first, declaring therapy unnecessary. "Isn't love enough to fix things?" she asked. But I countered that if she truly loved Leonard, she owed it to him, and to herself, to try. Eric backed me up, stressing that an unbiased perspective could help them break free from destructive cycles. Reluctantly, Janet agreed. Leonard was hesitant when I broached the subject, but after some persuasion, he agreed to attend a session if Janet showed genuine commitment. She did. They scheduled their first appointment with a couples therapist, and I accompanied them to the waiting room for moral support. As the door to the therapist's office closed behind them, I couldn't help but reflect on the poetic irony of the situation. Janet, who had once paraded Amanda at my wedding as the epitome of a perfect wife, was now turning to therapy to redefine what it meant to be a partner. The therapy sessions were grueling but transformative. After a few weeks, Janet and Leonard invited Eric and me to join one of their sessions to better understand the family dynamics at play. Sitting in that softly lit room, I felt vulnerable as we aired long-buried grievances. I spoke openly about the humiliation I had felt on my wedding day, and how Janet's interference had nearly overshadowed one of the most important moments of my life. To my astonishment, Janet apologized, something I had never imagined hearing from her. Leonard, too, opened up about how Janet's controlling ways had extended beyond their marriage, affecting Eric's life choices. Eric remained composed but firm, explaining that while he loved his mother, her constant interference had caused him pain. The session was raw and uncomfortable, but it marked a turning point. For the first time, Janet seemed to truly listen. Over the following weeks, Janet began to change in small but meaningful ways. She started asking people what they wanted instead of telling them what they needed. Leonard, in turn, began to let his guard down, agreeing to a trial period of cohabitation under new terms. Their progress was slow and imperfect, punctuated by occasional arguments over trivial matters, but they were learning to communicate in ways they never had before. Months later, Eric and I hosted a gathering in our backyard to celebrate both our belated wedding reception, the one we had truly wanted, and the progress Janet and Leonard had made. As the evening sun cast a golden glow, I spotted them standing by the gardenias, their hands intertwined. The sight made my heart ache with a bittersweet mixture of relief and pride. Toward the end of the night, Janet approached me. Taking my hands in hers, she said softly, "I was wrong about you. Thank you for helping me save my marriage, and for showing me there's another way." Her eyes, misty with emotion, shone with sincerity. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Life has a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes the person you underestimate becomes the lifeline you never knew you needed.